They called her a criminal, but she was just a girl with feet torn open by the desert, a girl who crossed 3 countries with paper in her hands and hope folded inside her chest like a worn-out prayer. She didn't speak much, didn't cry either. Not because she wasn't hurting, but because the silence had become safer than words. Her name was Nayeli, which means "I love you" in a language older than this country. But the judge would never say that name. She just called her Case the C-1247, like she was a box to be filed, like her story didn't matter. But let me tell you, child, her story mattered more than most. She came here pregnant, but not by love. The man who planted that child in her womb left bruises on her ribs and fear in her sleep. She crossed rivers with a heartbeat not just in her chest, but inside her belly. 2 lives hiding in one fragile frame. And when she reached the courthouse steps, she did what no mother should ever have to do. She left the baby, wrapped in a shirt that smelled like home, with a note folded tight between his tiny feet. "I want him to live." That's all it said. She rang the bell, whispered a prayer, and ran, because in her country, they'd kill her, and in this one, they'd cage her. Now tell me, what kind of world makes a woman choose between her own child and her own life? What kind of justice makes love feel like a crime? She was caught 5 hours later, hiding behind a gas station dumpster, dirty, silent, holding on to a piece of the shirt she'd left behind. And when they cuffed her, she didn't scream. She just asked one question. "Did they find him?" And the officer, he didn't even answer, just turned her around and pushed her into the back seat like she was trash. But she wasn't trash. She was a mother, a warrior, a soul stitched together by suffering. And her silence, it wasn't weakness, it was survival. If you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever been punished just for trying to survive, stay right here with me, because this story, it wasn't born to be beautiful. It was born to be told. They booked her as Jane Doe. No documents, no lawyer, no voice. The courtroom was cold, not just in temperature but in spirit. You could hear the ticking of the clock, but not the beat of a heart that cared. Nayeli sat in a beige jumpsuit, chains on her ankles, hair unwashed, lips chapped from the desert wind. The bailiff didn't look her in the eye, neither did the public defender. And when the judge walked in, a tall white woman with hair tight like wire, the air thickened. Her name was Judge Marlena Whitmore, and her eyes didn't see a mother. They saw an illegal, a burden, a problem to be solved. Nayeli didn't speak English, but she understood the tone. Disgust is a language all its own. And when the interpreter whispered in her ear, she nodded slowly, even though her body shook. She wasn't trembling from fear, she was trembling from holding everything in. The judge looked down through her glasses. Left a baby on federal property, no ID, illegal entry, evading arrest, abandonment of a minor. Each word hit harder than the last, each syllable a sentence of its own. And then the judge said something that froze the whole room. "You people always run from responsibility." The lawyer didn't flinch. The bailiff didn't blink. The interpreter didn't translate. Only the silence reacted, loud, heavy, violent. Nayeli's face stayed still, but inside, a fire started burning. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even shame. It was memory. Because she hadn't run from responsibility. She had run toward hope. But that truth didn't matter here. Not to this system, not to this judge. To them, her body was evidence, and her silence was guilt. They gave her no bail. Said she was a flight risk. Locked her up in a cell with no window, just a Bible missing the Book of Ruth, and a metal toilet that stank of judgment. But Nayeli, she knelt every night and whispered prayers in a tongue this country never cared to learn. Not for rescue, not for revenge, but for her son, for his safety, his warmth, his chance, even if she never saw him again. And on the 6th night, as the moonlight found its way through a crack in the ceiling, she heard a sound, a whisper, like a lullaby from a dream, but it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the next cell, a woman's voice, broken, singing in Spanish. A song her abuela used to sing when the world felt like too much. Duérmete niño, duérmete ya. And Nayeli, for the first time in days, let herself cry. But that lullaby? It wasn't just a comfort, it was a message, because the voice singing it knew her name. There are some sounds that the soul never forgets, even after crossing deserts, even after cages and courtrooms and chains. A lullaby is one of them. It slips through cracks like moonlight. It seeps under doors like forgiveness. That voice from the next cell, it wasn't just singing, it was remembering. And Nayeli, curled up on a thin mattress with rusted springs, closed her eyes, and for a moment she was 5 years old again, back in Oaxaca, under a palm roof, her abuela combing her hair with gentle hands and that same song on her lips. But this wasn't Oaxaca. This was cell block 3B, and the voice? It belonged to a woman named Isadora, 53, from Honduras. Been in and out of ICE detention for almost a decade. No papers, no trial, just process. That's what they called it, process. Like lives were laundry, like hearts could be folded and filed. Isadora had seen women like Nayeli before, young, pregnant, broken, but not gone. And when she sang that lullaby, she wasn't just comforting her. She was calling her back to herself. Back to her name, back to the fight, because silence can protect, but sometimes silence can kill. That night they spoke for hours through the vent between their cells. Whispers, confessions, secrets held too long. Nayeli told her everything. The man who took her by force, the baby who grew inside her like a second chance, the decision to leave him, not out of abandonment, but out of protection. And then the courtroom, the coldness. The judge. Isadora didn't gasp. She just sighed. Said she knew Judge Marlena Whitmore. Said she'd seen what that woman could do. She don't want justice, Isadora whispered. She want to punish. Punish girls like us, women with accents, with brown skin, and stories that don't fit into her rules. But then Isadora told her something else, something no one else knew, a name. Amari. That was what the hospital named the baby. Amari. They gave him to foster care, placed him with a couple outside El Paso. Good people, Isadora thought. Maybe. But what struck Nayeli wasn't the name. It was how Isadora knew it. How do you know? And Isadora paused. I used to work in that courthouse, cleaning floors at night. I heard things, saw things, kept quiet too long. Then she whispered one more thing. The baby didn't cry when they found him. And Nayeli froze, because she remembered something from that morning. When she left him, wrapped in her shirt, he was looking at her, eyes wide, silent, like he already knew what she was about to do, like he forgave her. But that silence, it wasn't peace, it was a wound, and that wound had just been opened. Nayeli pressed her hand against the wall between them, and from the other side, Isadora did the same. Two women, two strangers, bound not by blood, but by exile. But before the night ended, Isadora told her one last thing, something that didn't make sense. Not yet. Your baby wasn't the only one left at that courthouse. She couldn't sleep that night. Not after what Isadora said. Your baby wasn't the only one. The words kept echoing, bouncing off the concrete, settling into her bones like dust. How could that be? What did it mean? Was there another child, another note, another mother running from something she couldn't name? Isadora wouldn't say more, just murmured a prayer in the dark. And Nayeli, she lay awake until morning, counting every breath, every ceiling crack, every piece of herself that still remembered how to hope. But in that cell, time moved like molasses. No windows, no clocks, only the sound of keys, footsteps, and the occasional scream from down the corridor. Then, on the 7th day, a guard came to her door, tall, thin, eyes tired like he'd stopped seeing people years ago. You got a visitor. She blinked. A what? But he didn't answer, just opened the cell and led her down the hall. The light in the interview room burned white and cruel. She sat, hands cuffed, back straight, like a statue made of bruises. And when the door opened, it wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't the judge. It was a woman, black, mid-30s, sharp eyes, clipboard. "Name's Miss Carter," she said. "Child Protective Services." Naili didn't respond, didn't trust the title, didn't trust the suit, the smile, the badge. But Miss Carter didn't try small talk. She opened a folder, flipped through pages, stopped. "Your baby, Amari, he's healthy, no signs of abuse. Foster couple seems stable." Then silence. Long, heavy, until she added, "But the judge doesn't want reunification." Nayeli's breath caught. "She's pushing for permanent separation." Nayeli gripped the metal table, like it was the only thing keeping her from shattering. "Why?" Miss Carter looked her in the eye, and for the first time something flickered. Guilt, maybe, or something deeper. "She says you abandoned him, that you're dangerous, unfit." Then she leaned in closer. "And she's fast-tracking the adoption. Closed case. No hearing, no voice, no chance." Something inside Nayeli cracked, not loud, not with screams, but with stillness, that kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Then Miss Carter whispered something she shouldn't have, something she later said was a slip. She said, "One less brown baby to worry about." And in that moment, Nayeli didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't breathe. But inside, she made a promise to fight, not for herself, but for him, for Amari, for every child this country tries to erase. And just as Miss Carter gathered her things to leave, she hesitated, turned, and said, "There was another baby, you know, years ago. Same courthouse, same judge." Then she looked at Nayeli like she already knew the truth. But that child disappeared from the system, gone. No records, no trace, no justice. The system loves silence. It feeds on it, grows fat on the backs of the voiceless. And in that silence, it does its darkest work. Behind thick doors, inside manila folders, beneath the weight of white lies and black robes, Nayeli sat alone again, back in her cell. The visit from Miss Carter still fresh in her mind. One less brown baby to worry about. Those words didn't just sting. They scarred, branded her with the truth she already knew but had tried to forget. This wasn't about law. It wasn't about justice. It was about erasure. She spent the next few nights not sleeping, not praying, not crying, just remembering. Every breath her son took inside her, every time he kicked, every time she whispered stories to him in the dark. "Voy a protegerte, mi amor." I will protect you, my love. But how do you protect a child from a world that thinks he shouldn't exist? She needed answers. And there was only one person left who might have them, Isadora. So the next time the food slot opened in her cell, she pressed her mouth close to the wall and whispered, "Tell me about the other baby." A long silence. Then a sigh from the other side. "He was left like yours, wrapped in a red sweater, same courthouse, same bench." Nayeli's heart pounded. When? 2007, 18 years back. Long enough for a child to become a man, but not long enough for a mother to forget. They said a janitor found him, but no name, no note, no trace. Then Isadora paused. "I was working the night they took the security footage." Footage disappeared, just like the baby. Nayeli's breath caught. "Who?" And Isadora didn't speak for a long while. Then she said one name, Whitmore, the judge. The same woman who now sat on the bench deciding her fate, deciding Amari's fate. But back then she wasn't a judge. She was just a clerk, young, ambitious, hungry, and dangerous. That night Nayeli scratched something into the wall, with a piece of metal from the bed frame, slow, deliberate. Just one word, resist, resist. Because even if they took everything else, her voice still lived in that word. The next morning the guards changed. A new one, younger, Mexican-American. He didn't speak much, but he saw her. Not like a number, not like a case. And when he brought her tray, he slipped a folded napkin beneath it. Nayeli opened it slowly. Inside, written in shaky pen, "Someone's watching you. Be careful." Her eyes darted to the camera in the corner, and for the first time, she understood. They weren't just locking her away, they were trying to disappear her. That same day, her name was suddenly added to the court docket. Emergency hearing, no explanation, No lawyer contact, no translator request, just appearance required. And when she arrived in that courtroom again, handcuffed, swollen-eyed, hair tied back with a piece of string, the judge didn't look surprised. She looked prepared, as if she already knew what was going to happen. And just before the interpreter arrived, Judge Whitmore leaned forward and whispered something only Nayeli could hear. "I know what you did." But Nayeli wasn't afraid this time, because now she was starting to remember what they did too. Secrets rot in the dark. They fester, they swell, they poison everything they touch. But sooner or later, even the deepest secret finds its way to the surface. Judge Marlena Whitmore had built a life on rules, on order, on the illusion of righteousness. But behind that polished bench, behind the tight bun and the gavel she held like a sword, there was rot, and Nayeli could smell it now. The hearing was short, too short, 5 minutes. No translator, no defense present. Judge Whitmore signed a motion, terminating parental rights, just like that. No trial, no testimony, no voice, just silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any courtroom ever could. But when they wheeled Nayeli out, shoulders hunched, wrists bound, eyes hollow, she passed someone in the hallway. A woman, holding papers, wearing heels that clicked too fast. Miss Carter. She looked shaken, hands trembling, lips pale, and in her hand, a file, old, dusty, as if it had been buried in some back office for years. Nayeli glanced at the folder before the guard pushed her on. She saw one word stamped across the top, closed, and a year. Back in her cell, Nayeli barely breathed. She knew, deep down, that file was about the other baby, the one Isadora had mentioned, the one that vanished. And if that file came out now, it could change everything. But files don't speak for themselves. People do, and most people are too afraid. So she waited. 3 days passed, and then late one night Miss Carter returned. Not to visit, not officially, but quietly. She stood by the bars. No guards, no clipboard, just fear in her eyes. "I shouldn't be here," she said. Nayeli sat up slowly. "Then why are you?" Miss Carter hesitated, then whispered, "I found something." She held up the file. "This case was supposed to be sealed, but someone logged in last week and tried to erase it." Nayeli frowned. "Why would they do that?" Miss Carter opened the folder. There was a photo inside, grainy, black and white, taken from an old surveillance tape. A bench, a red sweater, and a woman walking away, face blurred. But the posture, the shape, it was her. Judge Whitmore. Nayeli's stomach turned. "She left the baby." Miss Carter nodded. "Yes, 18 years ago." Nayeli's voice trembled. "But why would she hide that?" Miss Carter looked at her and said the one word that changed everything. "Because that child might still be alive." And then she added, "And he might be the one who fostered your son." The system runs on lies, but blood don't lie. It remembers. It speaks. Even when buried beneath paper, silence, and fear. Nayeli sat with her back against the cold wall, Miss Carter's words still circling like vultures inside her chest. That child might still be alive, and he might be the one who fostered your son. What kind of twisted circle was this? A woman who abandoned her child, now judging another woman for doing the same. Except Nayeli hadn't walked away out of shame. She'd walked away out of sacrifice. But Judge Whitmore, she'd erased the past to build a throne on top of it. Miss Carter whispered fast, eyes darting toward the hallway. He was never officially adopted, no name, just initials, M.W., like hers. Nayeli's throat tightened. "Where is he now?" "I don't know," Carter said. "The file ends abruptly after 2018. It's like he disappeared again." But Nayeli saw the hesitation behind her eyes. There was more. "What aren't you telling me?" Miss Carter leaned closer. "Last year, the judge quietly approved a foster placement in El Paso." Nayeli's eyes widened. "El Paso is where they took Amari." She nodded. "The foster father's name is Mark Whitmore." A silence fell, not empty, but full of realization. Could it be? That the man raising her son was the abandoned son of the very judge trying to take him away? Could blood be binding this web tighter than anyone knew? But that wasn't all. Miss Carter pulled out one last paper, a form, signed, stamped, marked with a seal that felt more like a wound. It was a petition to terminate parental rights, filed by the judge herself, filed not as a judge, but as a private citizen, as Marlena Whitmore, foster grandmother. Nayeli felt something burn inside her chest. This wasn't law. This was theft, legalized, sanitized, weaponized. Miss Carter's hands trembled as she folded the paper. She wants to erase you, Nayeli, not just from Amari's life, but from the record, from the memory, from history. And then she said something so quiet it barely escaped her lips. She's done it before. Nayeli stared at her. What? Carter looked away. 2 other cases, young mothers, same pattern, no translators, no hearings, terminations filed under emergency orders. And the children, her voice cracked, gone. Outside, footsteps echoed. Miss Carter panicked. I have to go. But before she turned to leave, Nayeli grabbed her wrist. Please, she said, voice low, I need to see him, just once. Miss Carter looked down, then nodded. I'll try. That night, Nayeli didn't cry. She didn't pray. She sat in the dark, tracing circles on the wall with her thumb. Not to pass time, but to remember that time still passed. And in the quiet, a memory returned. Her son's first breath, so small, so silent, and yet so powerful, because it meant he lived, despite everything. And now, she would too. But the next morning, something changed. Isadora didn't answer through the wall. No lullaby. No prayer, no whisper, just silence. Not the kind that heals, the kind that warns. There are silences that feel like peace, and silences that feel like graves. That morning, when Nayeli pressed her ear to the wall, she expected a whisper, a cough, a hum, anything. But all she found was absence. The kind of absence that doesn't just echo, it haunts. She tapped twice. No answer. She whispered, Isadora. No answer. And that's when she knew something was wrong. The guard said nothing, pretended not to hear her questions, not to see her worry. Lunch came, then dinner, no noise from the other side. By nightfall, Nayeli's fingernails were bloody from banging on the concrete. And finally, one of the older guards walked by. She begged him, Please, cell 3C, the woman next to me, what happened to her? He looked at her, for the first time, without the uniform in his eyes. She's gone. Gone where? He hesitated, then muttered under his breath, Medical. But she saw it. In his face. It wasn't medical. It was a transfer, or worse. That night, Nayeli didn't sleep. She stared at the wall that once sang to her, and now stood like a tomb. Had Isadora said too much? Had someone heard her? Had her voice become too dangerous? The system doesn't like loose ends. And Isadora, she had become one. Nayeli sat in the dark, heart pounding, thoughts racing, and then she remembered something. Isadora once said, I used to keep a journal, hid it in the ceiling vent. Back when I still believed someone would care. What if it was still there? What if the answers were waiting, just above her head? She stood on the metal cot, stretched, felt the dust sting her eyes. The vent was loose, just barely. With shaking hands, she pulled it open. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a notebook, worn, faded, torn at the edges. She opened it. The first page read, For the ones they tried to disappear. Each page told a story, names, dates, places, young mothers, stolen babies, whispers in the hallway, but one entry froze her in place. MW, courthouse, red sweater, no record of intake, clerk disposed of note, security tape deleted, reassigned to private placement, suspect Marlena Whitmore. It was all there, everything, proof, buried in pen and paper, a map of injustice, a confession, hidden in a ceiling, and in the final pages, a name, written in all caps, underlined 3 times, Mark Whitmore, and next to it, a sketch, a face, young, brown-skinned, eyes wide like Amari's, and underneath, One question: does he know? That night, Nayeli pressed the notebook to her chest, not for protection, but for memory, because now she knew. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth, about giving voice to the ones who never had a chance to scream. But as she drifted into sleep, exhausted, she didn't hear the footsteps outside her door, didn't see the shadow that stopped in front of her cell, didn't know the warden had received a new order, one that came from the very top. Transfer to federal facility, immediately, no outside contact. They moved her before the sun had the chance to rise. No warning, no explanation, just the sound of keys, and two guards with cold hands and colder eyes. "Get up!" She clutched the notebook to her chest. One of them snatched it from her. "What's this?" "Property," she said, voice trembling. But they didn't care. They tossed it into a plastic bin marked confiscated items, like it was contraband, like the truth was dangerous. And maybe it was, because truth in a place like this, it cuts deeper than bars ever could. They shackled her ankles, her wrists, her waist. The chain between her hands felt heavier than it should have, like it carried something more than metal, shame, fear, or maybe just history. They shoved her into a van, no windows, no seatbelt, just black walls and a hum so loud it swallowed her thoughts. And for 5 hours she sat in that box, rocking with every bump, breathing with every prayer. Not for freedom, not anymore, but for clarity, because something inside her had shifted. She wasn't just a girl running from a system, she was a woman standing inside the storm. And finally, she wanted to know why. Why Judge Whitmore hated her so deeply. Why silence had followed her like a ghost. Why that file had vanished and returned only to disappear again. The van stopped. Doors opened. Bright light, sharp air, a new place, bigger, colder, whiter. Federal holding facility, Del Rio. Inside, the walls smelled like bleach and broken promises. A man greeted her, tall, grey suit, eyes like winter. "Ms. Alvarado," he said, using her name for the first time. Nayeli narrowed her eyes. "I didn't tell you my name." He smiled. "We know everything." But his smile was plastic, and beneath it, something rotten. He walked her down a long corridor, showed her to a new cell, smaller. No toilet, no window, no sound. Just her, alone. But before he left, he said one thing, one sentence that chilled her blood. "The judge asked me to make sure you're comfortable." He didn't mean it, and she knew. This wasn't about comfort. It was about erasing her, slowly, quietly, completely. She spent the first day in silence, but not the kind they wanted. This was a silence of defiance. Inside her head, the stories kept circling. Isadora's voice, Miss Carter's file, the sketch in the notebook. Mark Whitmore, a boy who might not know who he is. A man raising her child, maybe without knowing the blood that connected them. But there was no way to reach out. No paper, no phone, no visitor list. Until something unexpected happened. That evening, the slot in the door slid open. No food tray, just a note, folded, torn from a legal pad. No signature, just 4 words. "He's starting to ask." She stared at it for a long time, hands shaking, eyes full, because he could only mean one person. Mark, and the asking, that meant he was remembering things no one wanted him to remember. But who sent the note? Who was still watching? Still resisting? She didn't know, but she folded the paper and placed it under her tongue, just in case, because they could take her words, but they wouldn't take the truth, not this time. And just as she closed her eyes that night, a voice echoed through the vents, a whisper, not Isadora, not Carter, a man. "I know what she did, and I think I might be her son." Some truths don't arrive with thunder. They arrive like a breath, soft, barely there, but once they enter you, they never leave. "I think I might be her son." The voice was young, unsteady, wounded, like it didn't know what to believe. And Nayeli, frozen on the cot, leaned closer to the vent. "Mark," she whispered. Silence, then a breath. "How do you know my name?" She didn't answer right away, because how do you explain a lifetime in one sentence? How do you tell a boy he's living in a house built on someone else's silence? Finally, she said, "Because I know the woman who abandoned you." Another pause, then, "You mean Judge Whitmore?" She closed her eyes. "No, she didn't abandon you. She hid you." He laughed, but it wasn't joy. "Same thing." Mark's voice came and went in fragments. He told her about the house. Big, quiet, immaculate, a picture of perfection, but hollow inside. She never talked about the past, just said I was chosen. Chosen, a pretty word for stolen. He said he found a file last week, in the basement, labeled MW Confidential. Inside it, a photo of him on a bench as a baby, a red sweater, a torn envelope, and a note with a single line scribbled in faded ink. "I hope someone will love you." No signature, no date, no mother's name, just hope. "I thought it was from her," he said, "but now I don't know." Nayeli swallowed hard. "It wasn't. That's not her handwriting." He was quiet. Then, "Who are you?" She leaned into the vent. "I'm the mother of your son." Silence. Breath. Then, "Amari?" She nodded, even though he couldn't see. "Yes." Another silence. Longer. Deeper. "I thought he was placed randomly. They never told me his name. They just said he was available. A newborn, no parents, no ties." Nayeli's voice cracked. "They lied to both of us." Then he asked a question she didn't expect. "Why did you leave him?" She answered slowly. Every word carried like a prayer through the metal vent. "Because I was running from death. Because I was undocumented. Because I had no choice." He didn't speak, but she felt it. He was listening, really listening, and in that silence, something shifted. Not trust, not yet, but possibility. He whispered one more thing. "I need to know who I am." She nodded. "We both do." And then the vent went silent again, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was something else. A seed, planted and growing. But outside that room, in an office lined with books and lies, Judge Whitmore received a call. "Mark's been asking questions." She didn't speak, just stared at her reflection in the glass, then whispered, "Shut it down. There's a reason powerful people love bookshelves, not because they read what's on them, but because they hide what matters behind them." In her grand office, Judge Marlena Whitmore sat still. No robe, no gavel, just a silk blouse the color of old wine, and a glass to match. She swirled it slowly, not for the taste, but for control, and behind her, shelves climbed the walls like a cathedral, row after row of legal texts and doctrine, cases she quoted in court, laws she twisted to her will. But behind one of those shelves, hidden by a false panel, was a door, and behind that door, a room, not large, not furnished, just a file cabinet, and a single bulb hanging from the ceiling like a noose. Inside that cabinet were the names, 3 of them, 3 women, 3 babies, all brown, all undocumented, all erased. One was Nayeli. One was another mother from Guatemala, Lucia. Committed suicide 2 weeks after losing her child, case marked as resolved. And the third, the first, a girl no one remembered anymore, except Marlena, because Marlena had once been her. She hadn't always been powerful, hadn't always known how to hide things. There was a time she was just a scared 19-year-old with a belly full of shame. No father to speak of, no church to protect her, no name for the pain she carried. So she left him, wrapped him in a red sweater, wrote a note she never signed, and walked away. But when she got accepted into law school, when she married a man who needed a baby to complete the picture, she remembered, and used her influence to find him. Mark. Raised him as if the past had never happened. But lies, they ferment, and Mark had started sniffing the rot. In her office, Marlena opened a drawer, took out a burner phone, dialed a number she hadn't used in years. A voice answered, "Yes?" She didn't greet. She didn't breathe, just whispered, "She knows." Across the country, in a federal cell too cold for skin, Nayeli held on to the memory of the boy's voice. Mark, so polite, so unsure, so cracked in places he didn't even know existed. But she believed him now, believed he would try, not because he owed her, but because he had questions too, and questions are like seeds. You plant them, they grow into storms. She sat cross-legged on the floor, recalling every detail of Isadora's notebook, and one word stood out: tape, a surveillance tape. From the night Marlena left her baby, destroyed, supposedly. But Isadora had written something strange. Copy made, stored outside courthouse. Where? Who? She stood up suddenly, walked to the door, banged once, then twice. The guard came, annoyed. What? I need a phone call, she said. He laughed. No access. I know where the tape is. He stared. What tape? The one your boss would kill to keep hidden. Now he didn't laugh, just narrowed his eyes. She leaned in. Let me speak to Miss Carter. 2 hours passed, then 4. No answer. And just when she thought they'd buried her request, the door opened. Miss Carter walked in, eyes wide, face pale. How do you know about the tape? Nayeli smiled, because now she wasn't just a girl behind bars, she was a woman holding the match. But outside the facility, in the parking lot, a black SUV waited. Inside it, a man in a blue suit spoke into a radio. Targets found the file. Eliminate all backups. And then he said, get the boy. There are storms you see coming, and storms that start inside you. Mark Whitmore sat alone in his car, outside a gas station on the edge of El Paso, hands shaking, mind spinning. He had left the house 2 hours ago. No phone, no wallet, just a key to a lockbox he wasn't supposed to know about. Behind a loose board in the garage, he found it. A tape, dusty, unlabeled. He took it without asking, because part of him already knew the answer. He just wanted proof. Back in the car, he stared at the plastic rectangle. It looked ordinary, but it held everything. A bench, a red sweater, a woman walking away. He'd watched the footage 5 times now, paused it, zoomed in, stared at the shape of her shoulders, the way she held the bundle, the way she cried, silently, face turned from the camera. It was her, the woman who raised him, the judge, and everything she'd ever told him was a lie. I saved you. You were abandoned. You were lucky to be chosen. But now, he felt like a museum piece, polished, displayed, disconnected from his origin. He wasn't chosen. He was claimed, like stolen land. His phone vibrated, a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something told him he needed to. He picked up. A voice, calm, soft, measured, like a blade wrapped in silk. Mark, I need you to come home. His mother, Judge Whitmore. He didn't answer. She continued, there are people who want to hurt our family. People who will twist things, use your confusion against you. He stayed silent. Then she said the one thing she never should have said. You don't want to end up like your birth mother. His hands clenched the steering wheel. Don't I? He said, and hung up. He drove, not home, not to her, but to someone who still had questions, to the woman in the facility, the one who whispered through vents, the one who claimed to be Amari's mother. Because even if she was lying, she was the only one who didn't treat him like a possession. When he arrived, 2 guards met him at the gate. You can't visit, one said. Mark pulled out a badge, his adoptive mother's badge, federal access. The man hesitated, then opened the gate. Inside, the air felt different, like the truth was alive, breathing, watching. A door opened, and for the first time, Mark stood face to face with Nayeli. No vent, no steel, just skin. She looked smaller than he imagined, but not weaker. She looked like someone who had nothing left to lose, and still stood tall. He sat down across from her. I saw the tape, she nodded. I knew you would. Then he pulled something from his jacket, a USB drive, laid it on the table. They're going to try to destroy this. She looked him in the eye. Then we need to make sure the world sees it first. And in that moment, a mother and the son she never birthed made a choice to speak together. But neither of them knew that while they sat in that room, someone had broken into Miss Carter's apartment and found something she'd kept hidden, a copy of the notebook and a letter addressed to My supervisor, in case I disappear. Some people don't leave behind gold, or land, or legacy. Some people just leave behind truth, and even isso, è perigoso demais. Miss Carter never planned to be a hero. She didn't wear armor, didn't carry signs, didn't shout. She just watched and listened and wrote things down when no one else dared, because she knew the system only pretends to forget. But the silence, it records everything. The letter was handwritten, ink slightly smeared at the bottom, as if the last lines had been written in tears. To whom it may concern, it began, if you're reading this, it means I've disappeared, or been made to. I worked under Judge Marlena Whitmore for 8 years. I saw her destroy lives under the guise of order. She used immigration as a weapon, poverty as a sentence, skin as evidence. And I stayed quiet. I told myself I was protecting my job, my future, but the truth is, I was protecting her. I let 3 women lose their children without hearings. I watched them be labeled unfit because they didn't speak English, because they didn't bow, because they didn't bleed the right color. And I knew. I knew about the baby in 2007. I saw the footage, the red sweater, the note. I knew it was her. Attached to the letter was a second envelope, labeled for Mark. Inside, a photo, a blurry ultrasound, labeled MW 1988. And a note scrawled across the bottom. He was born in silence, but silence is not the end. The letter made it to her supervisor. And her supervisor. He leaked it, not to the media, but to someone even more dangerous, a lawyer with nothing left to lose. A woman once disbarred for shouting too loud in the courtroom. A woman who now ran an immigrant rights non-profit out of a church basement in Tucson. And when she read the file, she whispered one word, finally. Now back inside the federal facility, Mark and Nayeli were still speaking, their voices low, their stories raw. Nayeli showed him a scar on her hip, a mark left from crossing the river. The day she fell, almost drowned, almost let go. She showed him a tear in her palm, where the barbed fence cut her open at the border, proof that this country didn't just ask for entry, it asked for blood. And Mark? He sat quietly. He had no scars on his body, but the ones in his memory, they were deeper. He told her about growing up in Marlena's house, the piano lessons, the private school, the silence at the dinner table. I always felt like I didn't belong, he said. Nayeli didn't try to explain it, didn't try to soothe it. She just nodded. Because that pain, she knew it too well. She'd carried it across countries, through deserts, into courtrooms. Now, he was carrying it too, not as a child of war, but as a child of a mission. Then he asked her something soft, almost scared. Do you think he'll remember me, Amari? She took a long breath. He doesn't need to remember you, because you're here now. And that was enough to begin again. But they didn't know that in another state a courthouse was being evacuated, a bomb threat. False, of course, but enough to delay hearings, enough to make files disappear, enough to buy the judge time, because Marlena wasn't done. She still had one move left, and this time, she wasn't coming through the law. She was coming through blood. There's something sacred about a voice, especially one that's been buried for too long. It don't have to be loud. It don't have to be pretty. It just has to be real. The non-profit lawyer, her name was Vera Santos. She'd spent 20 years losing cases, losing sleep, losing clients to deportation flights in the middle of the night. But when she read Miss Carter's letter, she didn't cry. She packed a briefcase, tied her hair, and drove through the night. By dawn, she was at the federal facility, demanding entry, and she had the one thing that opened locked doors, a federal injunction, backed by a coalition of human rights attorneys, senators, even clergy. She had names, dates, photos, she had the tape, she had the notebook, copied, digitized, backed up, and she had a voice recording from Nayeli. 1 minute, sent through a guard who'd turned whistleblower. In it, Nayeli said just one thing. I left my son because I loved him more than I feared the system. That's all. That voice. It hit the courtroom like a hammer to glass. The judge presiding Not Whitmore, who had recused herself, listened, then asked coldly, "Where is the child now?" Mark stepped forward, face pale, fists clenched. "He's with me." "And who are you?" He hesitated, then said the truth. "I'm the son she left in 2007. Gasps. Cameras clicking. Reporters scrambling. And in that moment the truth wasn't just spoken, it spoke back, with fire, with dignity, with blood. Outside, protesters gathered, signs with words like, "Mothers are not criminals, children are not evidence, silence is no longer survival." The media picked it up, the case went viral, not as a scandal but as a resurrection. A woman thought erased, now standing in the light, a system that silenced her, now choking on its own paperwork. Judge Whitmore? She didn't show up. Not to the hearing, not to the press. But she wasn't gone. She was meeting with lawyers, drafting statements, spinning narratives, saying words like, "I did what I thought was right. I was protecting the child. I had no personal interest." But the truth, it had already run faster than her lies. Because blood don't lie. And the boy, he'd found his voice. That evening, in a federal cell soon to be opened by court order, Nayeli sat by the vent, waiting, not for permission, but for justice. And just before lights out, a voice returned. Not Mark's, not Isadora's, but a child's, a recording. "Hi, Mama. They showed me your picture. I miss you. I want to see you. Te quiero." Her hand covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook. But she didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She sat tall, because now she was heard. But just before midnight, a clerk walked into Judge Whitmore's office, holding a printed court order. She looked at it once, twice, then whispered, "She won." They locked her behind bars, thinking it would silence her. But her voice, it didn't live in her throat. It lived in the small things, in the worn-out cloth wrapped around her baby, in the prayer she whispered with her forehead pressed to concrete, in the scar left by the wire fence at the border. She didn't scream, she endured. And in the end, that's what saved everything. The new judge, a man who knew scripture better than statute, read through the case in silence. And when he finished, he took off his glasses with a trembling hand. "You are not a criminal," he said. And for Nayeli, those words were worth more than freedom. They were worth her dignity. The sentence was overturned, the case dismissed, the deportation order dissolved. But what remained was stronger than any ink on paper. It was the moment she stepped out of that prison and felt the warmth of the sun on her skin. And there, on the other side of the yard, he was waiting. Amari, tiny, clutching Mark's hand, holding a small toy in the other, and the whole sky in his eyes. She didn't run. She didn't fall to her knees. She walked, slow, steady, because that walk belonged to her. And when she reached him, she didn't say a word. She just opened her arms, and Amari, though too young to understand, but wise enough to feel, stepped forward and let himself be held, like he had been waiting his whole life for that embrace. Mark stood nearby, watching them, tears in his eyes. But not from pain, from understanding, because in that moment between them, he too was healed, not by finding his origin, but by realizing the truth didn't make him smaller, it made him whole. Across town, in the silence of a house too clean to be real, Judge Marlena Whitmore sat alone. The headlines spoke her name. The courthouse hallways emptied when she walked through. The walls she had built with cold words had collapsed. She sat in her chair, staring at a photo above the fireplace. Mark at 5 years old, wearing a blue shirt, smiling like he didn't know he'd been taken. She held the frame to her chest, and the glass cracked, because all lies, sooner or later, shatter. As for Nayeli, she didn't want revenge. She didn't ask for lawsuits. She didn't chase headlines. She just wanted to walk the street holding her child's hand, without being seen as a threat. She just wanted to say his name, make breakfast, teach him how to pray. She just wanted to be, without apologizing for existing. And one day, months later, she wrote a letter. Small, simple. "Today he called me Mama for the first time, and the sound of that was worth everything I lost." She didn't sign it with her legal name. She signed it with the name that survived everything, Survivor. And her story, it didn't make the newspapers. It didn't become a documentary. But it flew through skies made of paper, from voice to voice, from heart to heart. Because some truths aren't shouted, they're whispered until the whole world starts to listen. Pastor Elijah, voice tender, intimate, like a hand resting gently on your shoulder. If this story stirred something in you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, because not everyone gets the chance to speak, but everyone deserves to be heard. Did you hear her? Then now it's your turn. Whisper it forward, until it becomes thunder, until it becomes justice, until no more Nayelis have to go silent just to survive. Amen. The end.